Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in-store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here's Sri and Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter V.S. Bond, co-host of Consumer Engagement in Omnichannel World. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, the legendary Sri Rajagopalan, and we are in the middle of a series called Living in an Omnichannel World. This is episode 4 of 6, and joining us again is Bryan Gildenberg. Bryan is a senior vice president at Omnicom. For Sri and me, in our line of work, he's basically about as rock star as they get. So, Bryan, welcome for joining us, and please tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
I'm just going to tell y'all you need to find a different line of work. Anyway, hey, I'm Bryan Gildenberg, the SVP of Commerce for the Omnicom Retail Group. The Omnicom Retail Group is a bunch of agencies that are all aimed at all things retail, brick and mortar, e-commerce, you name it. Probably known better by the trading brands they operate under, which are Haygarth, TMA, TPN, and then Tracy Locke and the Integer Group are two of the really big ones in the U.S. as well. So I've been here for about 3 months. Prior to that, spent 23 years at Kantar helping propagate better understanding of the retail world, again, both physical and digital, and happy to be with you guys.
Well, thank you. And Sri, welcome to you as well. Hope you're doing okay.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And happy to have you on board again, Bryan. I can't wait to get started and continue this dialogue.
Let's jump right into it. The last episode, we talked about retail transformation. Today, we're going to look at another element of the supply chain. Further up, it's brand. We're going to talk about how are brands transforming to continue to have shopper centricity at the heart of their business activities. So our first question to Bryan is, from a content perspective, where are brands focusing, or should they be focusing their effort to deliver a satisfying omni-channel shopping experience for shoppers?
I think it's a great question, and and I think so often, and Sri, you and I have had this conversation over the years in different places. And I think brands are getting better at this, but so much of this just has to start with the basics, right? I mean, we can talk about AI-powered dynamic creative and all the other stuff in the world, but if you can't teach marketers how to write product descriptions and to keyword populate and to get the images on the page that actually match the image of the product that's supposed to be sold, to not put a JPEG on there that's so slow it crashes Amazon, all of the foundational things in there that are just the basics, right? That's got to be done well. Without that, there's a whole host of issues that come up that are unsolvable by anything else. So, this is one of the things about e-commerce. It relentlessly punishes poor execution of simple things. So, and I think a lot of content management lives there. I think the second tier is reviews, and we'll probably chat about this at different times. And we talked about this in an earlier podcast. The syndicated nature of reviews is getting complicated. And this is something that was a reasonably obvious outcome of the way Google search engine works. But Google search engine rewards unique content. And if every e-commerce website has the same reviews, that's just not going to work very well. So that's the second. I think the next two, though, I think are kind of where your question was probably more gravitating towards. The next step is really about what I would call engaging content with purpose. And I think so often brands try to do the next cool thing, as they do. They'll lean into video and they make sure A+ content is right. It's like, yeah, you do, but A+ content works better than other content. It does, yes, if there's an actual purpose to it that actually amplifies what it is you're legitimately trying to accomplish. And I think so often, and this is one of the conversations that will come up a lot throughout this session, is the divide of work can lead to deeply irrational outcomes. So if you have a digital content team that's responsible for putting together digital content, and that's a combination of some junior people in your marketing group and an agency, the likelihood that content is going to resonate in any meaningful way with what you're actually trying to accomplish may be more coincidental than likely. So you've really got to make sure that the content has purpose, not just social purpose, not in this case, but actual purpose, brand purpose that's meant to achieve a commercial objective. And then the last one, I do think you're moving into the next generation of, the buzzwords around things like dynamic content generation and all that. Yes, that's all going to be a bigger piece of this. The ability to match the personalization capabilities of the digital marketing world with content that is more individualized towards somebody specifically based on what you know about them, I think will be important.
So Brian, as I was listening to you speak over there, I was thinking through AI and voice came to my mind. And the number of times I get asked on a daily basis with the things that I do about, hey, shouldn't we be investing in voice and AI? And what I tell people is, you have to know how to defend first. And there's so much room to optimize before you get into the attack mode.
Yeah.
And the industry as a whole isn't even attacking AI and voice yet in CPG.
And Sri, as you well know, the problem is that anything that funnels attention to your Amazon ecosystem or your e-commerce ecosystem, if that ecosystem is broken, one, you're just wasting resource because you can't keep that. You get punished for it. And two, you're just aggressively pursuing spending a ton of money to get a few shoppers into a suboptimal experience. It just doesn't make any sense.
I phrase that, Brian, as spending a ton of money. I wouldn't even call it an investment to look cool.
Yes, well, that's very true. And as someone who clearly spends a lot of money to look cool, I'll defer to your expertise in that space.
Touche. So I'm going to jump to a completely different area, and I want to go back to something we discussed in earlier episodes. That is private label. We talked a lot about Amazon private label, other private labels, the Target private label, which is a little bit more curated. In the new omni-channel world, which has arguably been around a few years now, and we've clearly said that COVID, post-COVID, don't expect too many behaviors to stick. How does a large-scale national brand of massive origin really should be looking at a private label, and what should be? I want to use the word defend against private label, but I'd rather say, how does a national brand? How should they look at a private label, and what should they be doing or learning from a private label?
Okay. Well, I think there's certainly things you can learn from private label. Notably the price point at which a certain type of value can be delivered. And I do think that one of the things that I think what private label is getting better at actually in the US, because for all the talk about strategy and premium, and the fundamental thing private label is getting better at is item level packaging, which is improving dramatically. And the design concept behind it, which has more thought put into it than it used to. Especially when private label was basically the mirror you held up to the brand. So it looks like the brand, it's cheaper. Let's roll. I think that though, if you are a brand and you're trying to figure out how to navigate the private label ecosystem, I would say that there's three things that you need to do apart from the obvious, which is try to have a better product if you can. In some categories you can't, right? I mean, you come out of the OTC world where you're required by law to have the same acetaminophen molecule as a private label, or weird things happen. But try to have a better product. But if you can't, then there's three things. Number one, in an e-commerce space is win search, and particularly in Amazon and the ecosystems like it, which are literally most of the American e-commerce ecosystem, your purchase decision generally isn't made looking at more than one item at a time. So if you can get the consumer not looking at private label as they get closer to conversion, that's how you fight it. And the way you do that is literally by winning search. I think that then leads you to a second point, which is how do you make queries brand-based, not category-based? Because the minute it's category-based, you're open to a whole host of different types of competition than you are if the query is brand-based. So that involves some of that search optimization, but a lot of that actually ties back way further up into the funnel around the type of, the buzz phrase around brand marketing, which is mental availability. What are you mentally available for in a definitive way? How do you actually establish that you're the definitive solution for that? So when the consumer gets to the search bar, they are looking for the brand, not the category. They're looking for the brand. In all likelihood, you're going to be able to fend off private label pretty effectively in that space. And then the third part is a commercial one, which is, every good brand marketer knows, quote unquote, their price elasticity. We could do a whole half-hour podcast on what's wrong with price elasticity, but one of the things that's wrong specifically is that the percentage more someone will pay isn't just related to a cost per ounce. It's related to the pack configuration the value is served in. And you've really got to watch your price pack architecture to make sure that the price point of your solution doesn't get too far afield from the from the private label. That's particularly acute in e-commerce, where you can't viscerally see size differences the same way. So, if I'm at $5.50 versus great value at $3, if my pack's a lot bigger, that's easier to see on the shelf than it is online, and the price gap becomes more eye-popping there.
So watch out.
Yeah, Bryan, I think that there are many ways in which brands have advantage in search, be it in a traditional browser, mobile, or even voice. I think we all agree that most consumers don't ask for facial tissue, they ask for Kleenex. And
right.
That gives them, at least out of the get-go, some limited advantages that the retailer, as they build out their search capabilities, will find ways to insert their private.
I do think, though, that over, to pick your data set, but I think there are data sets that would reveal that, I think, in a number of categories, the search is more category specific rather than brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's the.
So now that people are engaging with e-commerce substantially more because of the pandemic, going forward, how do you see brands engaging with shoppers, or vice versa, shoppers engaging with brands? What will be the primary channels and mechanisms?
Well, there's a lot to that question.
Sure.
I would say a few things. One, I think you'll see an acceleration of some of the changes we've been seeing for years, as people become, we talked about this before. Habits aren't going to be entirely what people are doing during COVID, but there are clearly things they're going to keep doing that they've been doing, most of which are engaging in the world in a slightly more digital way. So that acceleration is a big one. I think not to flip the question sideways, because I think if you just speeded up some of the transitions that you've seen, you'd probably have a reasonable look at that. I think the bigger change to me is when marketers start to need to think about not how are consumers going to engage with brands, but how they engage with the world. And is your brand where they're engaging with the world? I think it's going to get harder to pull people into platforms where brands are comfortable engaging with consumers, and through media, which consumers are comfortable engaging with consumers. It's going to be harder to move attention that way in natural moments where people are engaged in the brand. And I think that over time, really effective branding is going to bring that brand to life when that person cares about it. So personalization isn't just about knowing their demographics, but it's about knowing their context, when they're involved in something, where that involvement is, and then how does the brand come to life. I think that that's probably the biggest difference. It's probably less around tools and more around approach.
So Bryan, speaking of engagement and contextual around engagement being present where the shopper really is, the word that comes to my head is D2C.
Is what?
D2C, direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And I've personally said multiple times in the industry that D2C is the kryptonite of large CPG. So keeping that in mind, especially what you said about the contextual stuff, can a scaled brand or a perishable brand really build an effective D2C strategy? Should they be?
Yeah, let's take scaled and perishable, two different questions. So let's take them both. I think a scale brand, yes, and I think it ties back to this conversation we were just having. I think increasingly as marketers, you're going to be looking at, we want to have a deeper relationship with our consumer. Okay, what does that mean? That means you want to be a more engaged part of different conversations or experiences that they're having. Okay, good. So what are those different conversations and experiences? Where are they happening? And how close are they to commerce? So if they're close enough to commerce that you don't need a D2C proposition where you can convert quite naturally from that conversation, then fine. But I do think that more and more brands are going to be hanging out in spaces which are, to use classic marketing terminology, a little further up the funnel in terms of how they shape consumer perception of the brand and how they shape demand. their D2C platform might make sense because it saves you the hassle of running somebody through the Amazon Google industrial complex to get to your brand. And if you've already established a brand relationship with them, forcing them to go through that ecosystem, which is incented to change your behavior, isn't great. So that's where I think D2C provides a useful role, which is sort of as an insulated safety valve between your engagement with your consumer and the Amazon Google industrial complex. And and then trying to figure out where and how you need to do that. I think for scale brands, that's how I would think about D2C. For perishable brands, I mean, look at the rise of like meat co-ops and stuff like that are delivering meat to people's homes and stuff. And, in the end, the oldest D2C model in the world is ostensibly perishable, which is pizza. So, yes, you can do this. You just have to figure out how to get the value proposition right on the last mile, but sure.
Good advice, Brian. I think people should remember that example you just gave, the oldest one being pizza.
Yeah, I did an e-commerce slide like 15 years ago where, we had all these different segmentations for business models, and, we had eBay and Amazon, and I just threw Domino's on there. It's like, look, this is literally the oldest, apart from the fact that it's a telephone, it's a great e-commerce business platform. And as it turned out, it was. So.
Well, I'm in New Haven and I'm already craving some Pepe's pizza right now. So
nice.
I'm just jealous you get New Haven pizza.
Yes,
you'll be bringing Mystic Pizza.
We're gonna make a run right after the show.
I live in Jersey. I'm not jealous of Connecticut pizza, but that Pepe's at least gets some respect here. Like,
listen.
We would eat it as humans and not feed it to the dogs. So
I have respect for Trenton tomato pies, no question.
Wow, that's deep.
That's good stuff.
New Haven doesn't compare.
We're gonna have a rank punditry episode just on pizza along with Sri.
If you want,
and we'll throw in Ray Bari on Times Square in the middle.
So sad, so sad. So as brands are thinking about moving more into D2C and the mix of their activities across omni-channel selling shifts dramatically, what are some of the internal reorganizations that are going to need to take place to be able to leverage and take advantage of these new omni-channel directions?
Yeah, I think all of them. Look, I think if you wanted to try to get to the basics, it's clearly fewer silos, right? That's the easiest thing in the world to say. But then you got to think about what enables fewer silos and really get to work on that. Because every GM or CEO in the world has said to their organization at some point in the last 24 months, we're going to break down our silos, we're going to work more closely together. But until you actually enable that, you're just talking. The actual work involved in that, at least obviously you've got, and then everybody tries to do a reorg, and that's just the last thing you should do. Changing workflows for a big company is infinitely easier than changing organizational structures. Organizational structures involve the worst parts of people: ego, defensiveness, concern for their well-being and their families. An reorg brings out none of the good parts of humans. Whereas a process change, one, can make it look like work's going to be easier, and two, if it works, now all of a sudden people want to be involved in it because it's working. So rather than wanting to sabotage it because it's different, you get people wanting to be involved in something that's actually working properly. So you got to start with workflow first. Then once you get the workflow established, then the critical piece is building the tools so that the workflow can continue when a senior manager isn't staring at it. So, and that's where, and too many companies do a successful integrated project and go back to the way they're working, and you're just tossing different parts of demand creation and conversion over one wall to another because the workflow is disjointed, the data is disjointed, there's no flow. So you've really got to build an organization that can flow at that point. From there, how you're actually structured matters a lot less than people think. Like, I have observed in the 12 years or 13 years I've been studying e-commerce, a 0.0% correlation between any particular organizational structure and being good at e-commerce. So when I realized that a lot of consulting companies like to sell you that they have the answer, and the answer is org, because implementing an org change is how a consulting company gets paid. So you want to avoid that until you understand what the workflow destination is of that reorg.
Bryan, it's fascinating to hear you see that, because I know the shoes that I've worn myself as an e-com leader.
Yeah.
First question, even in an interview cycle, people have asked me is, how should we set up our org? Does it belong at the center? Does it belong in the
I don't know. What are you trying to do?
P&L out? You know that you and I see eye to eye on this stuff, but
Yeah,
it is what it is. So,
well,
but
just look at your own personal experience. I mean, you were really successful building e-commerce platforms at Pepsi and J&J. I can't think of two organizations structured more differently than those two businesses, just at their basic level. And you can build a successful model within the context of how your organization is set up. You just have to really think about what the work is and how the work should flow to do that.
But you're very correct, though, Bryan, in the sense, even today in digital retail, we're obsessing over the wrong things. I, for one, do not believe very strongly that the way you set up your org is how the outcome comes. There's so much work to be done in optimization. There's so much. It's the whole ego theory, setting it to the side, 50 years of training, setting it to the side and learning new skills. But that leads me to, I think, an area which we're going to dedicate a whole episode on, and that is the area of digital media.
Right.
Obviously, with digital media, retail media is the new hot puppy in the room. And that when I say digital retail media, I literally mean Amazon search, executing a banner ad on Walmart.com, and the various different retail platforms one may be trading in, including CVS.com or a ShopRite.com or a Kroger.com. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are true media agencies, but many of them are true media agencies. So the question I have for you, and again, this is so important because time and again, my observation is most companies are struggling through where and who should own this.
Yep.
I really don't care about ownership as much as how it's executed and the fact that you got to deliver for the consumer. But the war that's taking place today is, does it belong above the line as in trade funds, or does it belong below the line in the media mix? And I actually chatted with Katie Masters on a different podcast this morning from Bobsled Marketing on this very topic. I would really love to hear your opinion, and then we're going to come back and dissect this in the next episode.
Well, I think you know how I'm going to answer this, which is the first step is you got to stop caring about the line in the first place. So trying to answer, that's like the metaphor we used in the last podcast. The only way to win is not to play. The only way to answer that question is to stop asking it. So that being said, there are everything from history, budget, and legal restrictions around how that money moves. You've got to kind of incorporate all of those into how you think about it. I would say that just looking at it today, right now in the U.S., snapshot June 2020, I would say that there are different retailers, because of what they're trying to do, require you to think about that problem differently. And the juxtaposition I would use here is Target and Kroger. A lot of what Target's trying to accomplish is really about giving you access to their audience. So if it's an audience mapping strategy, that's a media play. And doesn't have always a ton to do with what's going to happen to your Target joint business plan. And as a result, the Target team shouldn't be buying that stuff. They don't know how, and it doesn't align with their objectives particularly. At Kroger, where the answer is about trying to drive provable transactions into the Kroger ecosystem so they can use the power of 8451 to show you're getting a great return on spend. Well, yeah, now that's going to impact the joint business plan. And that's something that the below the line team is going to need to think about. And that's probably the divide I would use. And I think this is a conversation we'll have in the next episode as a sneak preview. But I think this notion of how closely does the spend influence what you would do in the JBP, I think influences where you would think about where the money needs to come from. So what you don't want are people at headquarters spending money that are going to change the JBP without the people that actually own the JBP having an opportunity to have any input into that. And you don't want people who own the JBP trying to accomplish broader traditional above the line objectives with no earthly idea how to do that and no real incentive to. So those are the two.
Bryan.
Yeah.
As Peter goes into the last question for this episode, the one comment I wanted to close that area with, again, knowing we're going to come back to it in the next episode, is I felt the best way to solve this problem is address it in the strat plan of the company and have a position, as opposed to letting it float around with no position and arguing with each other all the time.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that. I think right now that's hard to do. As I said, I don't think the retail media ecosystem is well set up for a centralized standard approach, just because I don't think it's a standard ecosystem yet. So I think what the retailers are trying to accomplish is quite different and also relatively unsophisticated. But we'll have this conversation next time.
All right, let's close this out with a final question around brand CRM. And Bryan, feel free to name names if you're so inclined to do so. But are there particular CRM activities or examples of CRM programs coming from brands that you think are poised to succeed in an increasingly omni-channel commercial world?
I mean, probably, but I mean, especially in the big brand world, I would look to people that really know how to do CRM. Again, this, to borrow a metaphor used in an earlier podcast, is literally like giving kudos to the NASCAR driver that's winning lap 2. I think most brands just haven't really transitioned this very far into the digital world. If you want to look at a really good CRM program, look at somebody who really runs a good CRM program, whether that's American Express or Disney, which are the two best in the world. Or you could look at Ulta, which I think is just easier. So if you think about Ulta, Ulta's got 4 attributes to its program that I love. Number 1, it's legit mobile first in both communication and content. I think that's going to be critical. 2, they are actually very good at getting personal, both in terms of personalized value and knowing enough about you. And personal is so much more important in mobile because of the way the feed works. You've got to get relevant faster. So in order to be able to do that in mobile, you've really got to kind of know what it is you're dealing with and who it is you're talking to. And that's a little trickier in mobile, of course, because without, in the general mobile web, I don't always know exactly who it is I'm communicating with. 3rd is meaningful and really creating meaningful engagement. Actually, the brand that probably does this better than Ulta's is the company they're benchmarking, which is Sephora. And, my classic example of this is that, most businesses for their loyal shoppers give them extra discounts. Sephora threw them a party, which is just a really, really good idea. They put a Sephora sort of thing on, just a really great way to engage with people in a very different way. And I think the 4th attribute after mobile, personal, and meaningful, expansive. Does it serve to expand the relationship of the person you're talking to the environment that's engaging them, whether that's a brand or whether that's a retailer? But right now, I am sure there are brands in the world that are doing gangbuster work on CRM. And there are some that have programs like the infant formula companies have been doing this for years, right? So they've got an embedded ecosystem to be able to do that. But in terms of really a 2020s ecosystem, I don't think branded CPG is where you want to look for excellence in CRM.
Well, Bryan, we squeezed a whole lot of knowledge out of you today for this episode. So thank you very much. And we're going to do it again for our next episode, which is about media. And Sri has been primed for that. He's chomping at the bit.
He tried to do half of it in this one. So
I know he's shameless. That's why we love him. Is that branding on your T-shirt, by the way, Sri?
Yes, this is our new D2C brand, ZenFuel, with my 3 partners, that is launching on Labor Day. The website is actually up and ready. You can check it out, www.zenfuel.com. Stress, sleep, and energy.
We're all about shameless plugs here. Bryan,
I'm sending you my rate sheet as an influencer right now, Sri.
Absolutely.
You'll have it soon.
I want to thank Bryan for joining us for this episode. He'll be back for parts 5 and 6. I want to remind our followers that you can find our content on LinkedIn and on YouTube by searching for hashtag Shri and PVSB on the screen you see below me. If you're interested in seeing all the YouTube playlists, you can go to tinyurl.com/CPG podcast. And if you want to actually listen to, that's for the podcast. And if you want to actually watch the playlist for YouTube, you can go to tinyurl.com/Shri and PVSB. I want to make sure I get all of our wonderful terminology. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to having you come again for episode 5. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Shri. And everyone, have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPGGUYS LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPGGUYS LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPGGUYS LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPGGUYS LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.